Breaking news, a critical test in the criminal cases against two of President Trump's biggest political foes. A federal judge in Virginia just heard arguments in a bid from James Comey and Letitia James to disqualify prosecutor Lindsay Halligan. Their attorneys argue Halligan was handpicked by President Trump and is serving as interim U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia unlawfully.
And joining us now, CNN's crime and justice correspondent Caitlin Polans. Just getting out of the courtroom, Caitlin, you were inside, you listened to all those arguments. So what happened during the hearing?
Well, Wolf and Pam, I was listening very closely to how Judge Cameron McGowan Curry was going to handle this hearing. And she's a laid-back questioner, a very concise questioner. But boy, it was a grilling of the Justice Department if I have ever seen one before from a judge like this. What Judge Curry asked, her very last question of the the Justice Department, do you believe U.S. v. Trump was wrongly decided? That's a very telling question because the Trump defense team, when Donald Trump was a criminal defendant, he had won his case by having the prosecutor, Jack Smith, tossed off of it in Florida in a set of arguments very similar to this. And Judge Curry is now asking the Justice Department, are you guys against that now as the Justice Department wanting these cases against James Comey and Letitia James to go forward? The Justice Department lawyer responded, that's a different thing. That was a different situation that doesn't apply here. But that was quite a question that elicited gasps across the courtroom from a lot of people that were listening to this hearing. The other thing that Judge Curry did is she really dug in to some of the moves the Attorney General had made in this case to stand up and back Lindsay Halligan, the Eastern District of Virginia U.S. attorney, who's there sent by Donald Trump on an interim basis. The bigger picture of this case is about, has it been too long without a Senate-confirmed person in this job? Judge Curry asked some questions of that, but she had even more questions for the Justice Department, even a back and forth on whether or not it was needed for the Attorney General to send an order into court. And she pointed out that the Attorney General said in a statement to the court, in an order she signed on October 31st, she had read all of the grand jury transcripts in this case. The judge went back and forth with that Justice Department attorney saying that's not even possible, and some of them are missing. Wolf and Pam. Oh, one more thing. She's going to be ruling by Thanksgiving, so a judge acting very quickly here. Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much. Caitlin Polans. Let's bring in former federal prosecutor Elise Adamson. So, Elise, you heard Caitlin really lay it out there. Comey's attorney argued the case against the former FBI director suffers from a, quote, fundamental defect. Can you explain that argument?
Yes. So what Comey and James are arguing is that Lindsay Halligan was never lawfully appointed and that she lacked the authority to bring the indictments in the first place, that, essentially a private citizen walked into the grand jury and returned these indictments. And thus, they can't proceed. They simply can't proceed because they weren't properly brought. I think an interesting distinguishing factor between James and Comey is that the statute of limitations has now run on James Comey's cases. So if the judge rules in James and Comey's favor and ultimately agrees that Halligan was unlawfully appointed and dismisses the case, it is likely that the Comey case won't come back, although Letitia James's case has not exceeded the statute of limitations, and they could just appoint a new prosecutor to bring the case back.
Elise Adamson, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you for that context. We appreciate it.
The high-stakes hearing concerning Lindsay Halligan. She's the interim U.S. attorney handpicked by President Trump to prosecute the cases against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Attorneys for both say Halligan is not lawfully serving in her post and that the charges against their clients should be dropped. The hearing, of course, a crucial test for the criminal cases against two of the people President Trump has demanded DOJ target. The judge says she will be making her decision in this case before Thanksgiving. Let's break down today's developments, though, with CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig. He's a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York and a former federal prosecutor. Ellie, it is always good to have you here on days like this when we need to kind of sort through what exactly things mean. James's attorney arguing Halligan is unlawfully serving in her post. They're trying to make the case, in his words, she's pretending. Help us understand their argument here.
Well, Jess, that's a colorful way of arguing that Lindsay Halligan was not properly appointed as U.S. attorney. So ordinarily, we get our U.S. attorneys through a presidential nomination and then Senate confirmation. If that has not happened, however, federal law says the attorney general can then install a temporary U.S. attorney for 120 days. Once that 120 days is over, then it's up to the federal judges in that district. Now, that all happened here in Virginia. A man named Eric Siebert was put in place, did his 120 days, and then the judges said, you can stay as the temporary U.S. attorney. However, he then resigned under pressure arising from these cases, actually, and was replaced by Lindsay Halligan. So the argument that James and Comey are making now is the attorney general and the president cannot just keep appointing one person after another to 120 days, then another 120 days, then another 120 days. Therefore, they argue Lindsay Halligan is not appropriately serving as U.S. attorney. Therefore, they argue the indictment should be thrown out.
Yeah, and in the meantime, a DOJ attorney says that that argument is essentially, in their words, elevating a paperwork error. What do you think about that?
Yeah. It's a little bit of a glib argument made there by the Justice Department, but their point is it doesn't really matter. The law, first of all, they argue, does allow more than one of these 120-day appointments. They also argue it doesn't matter because it's all coming from the Attorney General anyway. The AG is the one who exercises prosecutorial power. It doesn't really matter who signs the indictment. And the last point they make is the prosecutor's signature on an indictment is not an actual part of the substantive indictment. The indictment itself is what the grand jurors find. The signature of the prosecutor is simply a formality, an authentication. And so even if she was improperly appointed, they argue the indictment should still survive.
Is it rare, should people make anything of the fact that this indictment was only signed by one prosecutor?
It is rare to see only the U.S. attorney sign an indictment. Often the U.S. attorney's signature will appear on the indictment, but then the line-level prosecutors, the regular prosecutors like I once was, will sign it too. The problem here was nobody at the point this case was indicted, nobody in that office was willing to go into the grand jury with Lindsay Halligan, and that creates a vulnerability because now, if the judge finds that Lindsay Halligan was improperly appointed, there's not that backstop of saying, well, fine, even if you take her name off the indictment, there was still two other prosecutors on it.
And remind people, Ellie, because we even see pictures of them side by side right now. These are separate cases with James Comey and Letitia James, but they are linked in this way. How will they continue to be linked going forward, depending on what the judge decides?
There's going to be a lot of commonality here. So yes, both Letitia James and Jim Comey, they're indicted in separate cases. They both happen to be in this same federal district, and they're both making the same argument about Lindsay Halligan's appointment. But also, Jess, watch in the coming days, they have both made, Letitia James and Jim Comey have both made arguments that they are being vindictively or selectively prosecuted. Now, those cases will be argued separately to their separate judges, but to a large extent, these two defendants stand on similar legal footing.
All right, Ellie Honig, always good to see you. Thanks for that.
Chaos. It wasn't a revolution, an election, or a protest that finally cornered Trump. It was the one thing he'd always treated as irrelevant: the law. For a man who lived his entire life bending rules, buying silence, and suing his way out of trouble, being told no was more than defeat. It was exposure. He thought the courts would protect him. After all, he'd stacked them himself. But the thing about power is that it believes its own myth until reality breaks through. One by one, judges, even the ones he'd handpicked, started ruling against him. They quoted the Constitution instead of cable news. They treated him not like a king, but like a defendant. And suddenly, the showman ran out of stage. That's when the rage began. He attacked them all, called them corrupt, biased, enemies of the people. But the truth is, he wasn't afraid of injustice. He was afraid of accountability. Because accountability doesn't bend to charm or threat. It's cold, procedural, boring, and unstoppable. It's the one thing that can't be bullied. Every courtroom became a mirror he couldn't break. Every ruling stripped away the myth he'd sold, that power makes you untouchable. And as the verdicts rolled in, civil, criminal, financial, America got to see something it hadn't seen in years. A system remembering what it was built for. Maybe that's why it mattered. Not because the judges were heroes. They weren't. They were just doing their jobs. But that's exactly what made it powerful. In an age of noise and spectacle, professionalism became rebellion. Integrity became resistance. And in those quiet moments, as gavels fell and lawyers argued, democracy found its pulse again. Trump always believed he could rewrite reality if he shouted loud enough. But law doesn't listen to volume. It listens to evidence. And when the shouting stopped, what was left were documents, signatures, and truths that didn't care about politics. That's how power ends, not in flames, but in paperwork. And maybe that's the final irony. The man who built his empire on television was finally undone by transcripts.